Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Pediatric Summit 2018. I'm Allie. Just a reminder, if you haven't gotten your tickets, you can go ahead and go on the pediatricsummit.com and get those. The seminar will be October 5th through 7th this year. And this year we're offering CE credits. So it will be a little bit longer and CE will be there. And this broadcast is brought to you by Chiro Futures, the only malpractice company that supports subluxation-based practice. And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Dan Bronstein. He is a chiropractor in Grover Beach, California, and he is pretty awesome. He is going to talk to us a little bit about philosophy today. So without any further ado, here is Dr. Dan.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
All right, so your talk at the summit, you were mentioning something about you're going to be talking about the philosophy in a modern practice. So maybe, I guess today could we maybe talk a little bit about how does that look when a patient comes in and you maybe don't want to shove philosophy down their throat and start throwing green books at them, but like how can you bring it down to a patient just coming in from no chiropractic understanding off the streets per se?
Yeah, that's a great question. My practice has undergone some pretty crazy, some changes over the past couple of years because I realized that, I take care of my family and the people that I love the most, or at least I was taking care of them differently than my patients because we as chiropractors have kind of adopted this fee-for-service model where like everything we do is a treatment. And in the minds of our patients, no matter how much education we do, they still always consider a chiropractic adjustment a treatment, right? Now, the wording may not seem like that big of a deal to folks, but when you start taking care of lots of kids, and it pertains to our philosophy, chiropractic is the art, science, and philosophy of locating and correcting vertebral subluxation with a cause in the nervous system. And we know that when you remove those sources of dysfunction and dis-ease, the body is able to heal itself. If anybody in the chiropractic sphere does not believe that, then we've got a problem. But if you believe that as essentially your major premise, we can proceed. When our patients come through the door, many of them, even if they're referred by our best patients, still consider chiropractic a treatment for a symptom. So you have to do your due diligence on day one to really help our patients understand that it's not about the symptoms, it's about function. Going back to Stevenson, which is, I've been reading volume 14 now. I think I'm on my third iteration. I've been reading it over and over for the past like 2-3 years. Stevenson, in the very early part of the freshman text, he talks about this concept of the normal complete cycle. We refer to it as the safety pin cycle, but I really don't like the safety pin. As a matter of fact, Stevenson only really talks about it, I think, on like page 8, and then never really talks about it again. But the safety pin cycle it's missing a lot of components. I think it's partially useful for patients, but it doesn't account for the fact that subluxation can kind of occur anywhere, in my opinion. It doesn't necessarily just have to occur at the dorsal root ganglion on the efferent side of the neuraxis. We know that afferent input is a huge part of subluxation, disafferentation, deafferentation. In the chiropractic neurology world, we call this frequency of firing. It means that the brain is not getting input from the spine in terms of movement. When kids are born with lots of trauma, subluxation is a huge part of their lives from the very beginning, and in some cases this goes all the way back to time in utero. And when that happens, kids are not able to fire certain pathways in their spinal cord that goes up to their brains to allow for activation. With kids that have major sensory issues, autistic kids, oppositional kids, ADHD kids, like this is a huge problem. And so if we're able to find the areas of their spine and nervous system that are not functioning optimally, and we remove those constraints, these kids start to express their biological directive to heal. Helping parents understand that in the first, hour that you're with them makes 100% of the difference. because again, like most of these parents have already been through a bunch of medical offices. In my office, they've already been through an average of at least 3 different providers, and they come to me going like, honestly, we don't know what to do and we're desperate. They don't want more of the same because it doesn't work. So really helping them understand that underneath all of that garbage that they're seeing on a day-to-day basis with the kids, even if it's simple constipation, helping them understand that the child does have that directive to be healthy, and you're just removing speed bumps. That's really the key, and it's congruent with our baseline philosophy.
Do you find that parents really latch onto the idea better of not just giving their child another diagnosis, but kind of helping them understand it's been something that maybe has been a problem since in utero or the birth process?
Yeah, they do. We're up against 2 things. Number one, we're up against direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising in the US. That's a juggernaut. And so parents have been brainwashed with thousands and thousands of hours to be convinced that their child is sick because they just have bad luck. So we're up against that. We're also up against the fact that parents feel a tremendous amount of guilt if their kiddos are sick. Especially if you have parents who have an autistic kiddo or a sensory kiddo, because they're doing a bunch of Googling and they're reading all the crazy conspiracy theories about what could be wrong with their kiddo. They blame themselves in a lot of cases, at least in my office, on vaccines, because we know that parents of autistic children have a very close temporal or time-related association between when kiddos start to regress and when they had their shots. So there's that guilt. They've also been told by pediatricians and other healthcare providers that their child isn't sick and there's nothing wrong with them. And I'm not going to sit here and say that autism is okay and the kiddo is special. We know that autistic kiddos are really sick. They have permeable guts. They have neuroimmune compromise. They have violent tendencies. I mean, the kids that I've seen in the past, the really sick kids, especially the Mido kids, these kids self-harm a lot. And I mean, I've seen multiple children in my career who have had this really most like this handful of children I've cared for will headbang to the point where they knock themselves out, and then when they wake up, they'll do it again. That's not okay. These kids are not just gifted or special. They're really sick. And if we can figure out a way to help them express their normal biological directive, then we owe it to ourselves and owe it to the parents to do that. I think once we overcome those barricades or those barriers for these parents and let them know that there is hope, that perhaps, we're not going to, change these kids' lives completely to make them back to so-called neurotypical, but we are going to improve their quality of life. These parents just, it's terrible for them. So just even creating that sense of hope so that they know there's a future is a big deal.
That's awesome. Do you find that a lot of these parents, I'm assuming, probably have a lot of other care providers you're co-managing their children with? Maybe not even if they're neurotypical, I'm sure they have other. Do you find it's hard to keep the philosophy grounded in those parents if they're always hearing things from other care providers as well?
No, not at all. The parents that stay in our office and, in terms of what I do, our retention in terms of keeping parents engaged in the chiropractic philosophy is above 85%. The reason it works is because parents come to our office ready to accept a change in paradigm. One of my favorite books of all time, and this was introduced to me by James Chestnut like 10 years ago, I think, when I saw him at Parker, is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It was written by a guy named Thomas Kuhn. And Thomas Kuhn, this book was written in 1987, I think, and he talks about paradigm shifting really for the first time in the scientific zeitgeist. Understanding that paradigms aren't shifted easily because belief systems are so heavily ingrained. Basically what has to happen is you kind of have to hit rock bottom. And I think most of these parents have gotten there. So when they come to my office and we start talking about the power that made the body heals the body, and this child does have a biological directive to be healthy, and there's all this toxicity and stress and you name it, that's contributing to these things, then we have a trajectory to help this kiddo actually do what he or she is programmed to do. It changes the dialogue between the parents and the other providers as well. What I find also is that if there are pediatricians and or other allied healthcare providers involved who are kind of just, I mean, they're just overwhelmed with these cases, because honestly, most providers are. They kind of take a back seat. They're like, oh, thank God we got somebody who wants to take on this case and we can just kind of relax a little bit. And what will end up happening is if the child starts improving, which almost always happens, the providers can go, oh, well, that's nice. Good. Great news. So, so yeah, the parents who are in my office, and I suspect this is the case with most pediatric chiropractors who see these kids, they see it firsthand. And once you see it, you can't unlearn it or ignore it. So
it almost sounds like parents of children with special needs grasp onto the philosophy more so, just from what you've been explaining. Would you agree with that? Or
yeah, totally. And I think honestly, before they even come into the office, they're ready to hear it. They're ready to hear it because they've been through this sort of treat from the outside in model, and they'll end up in our office going, okay, like there's got to be something underneath that we can fix or correct or straighten out so that the child can do what he's supposed to do. And I mean, with sensory kids especially, I know our call isn't really to discuss just sensory kids, but we have more sensory kids now than we've ever had in history. I think parents realize that these kids go through ebbs and flows. They have good days and bad days, and they can see the humanity behind the affective disturbances in these kids and realize that there is a neurotypical kid underneath all this garbage. We just have to peel away the layers so we can find him.
In your opinion, and maybe even experience, what is the best way to get this philosophy out there and to reach these kids that are trying everything else under the sun, or these parents, I guess, they're trying everything else under the sun for their kids?
It's a war of attrition, meaning, again, you're fighting against a juggernaut. You're fighting against a medical cartel that has more money, more time, more energy, and more minions than we're ever going to have as a profession. And so we have to start on the grassroots level. We have to get results. Chiro, taking care of kids is low-hanging fruit right now. Everybody's managed care is drying up. Nobody wants to take insurance anymore. And the easiest way for somebody to run a cash practice is to take care of children. Unfortunately, the training to take care of kids is hard to come by. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and most chiros, I feel, would rather have a color by numbers approach. The problem with this is that if you let one kiddo slide through the cracks, it prevents 10 additional kiddos from ever having access to chiropractic care. And so instead of using kiddos as business leverage to get them into your practice and build your practice, we need to really put the cart before the horse and start working on getting to becoming amazing chiropractors who can actually get amazing results. I'm reminded of a conversation I had on my podcast with Lyle Kocha, who's a good friend of mine out in Omaha. He's a monster Gonstead practice. And he basically says, the reason we don't see kids, or I'm sorry, the reason we see the OJ was writing is because, frankly, patients are different. Our environment is different. I find that, a lot of chiros kind of guess. They kind of just do what they were taught by a previous generation of chiros. But, patients are very, very different, meaning we have to adapt our skill set to be able to help these kids in a new milieu or a new paradigm that's built on the toxicity of modern times. One of my other mentors, Steve Hoffman, who I teach a lot with, he talks about how, 30 years ago, most of our patient base was understimulated. And so you can whack them with a shovel, like BJ used to say, and they would improve. Nowadays, our kids are so overstimulated or over-aroused that intensity takes on a new meaning in chiropractic offices. But if you're continually adjusting sliding through the cracks, and that's bad for not only our brand, but unselfishly, it's bad for every other kiddo who may have had exposure or access to chiropractic care who no longer does. So education is key. It's getting the word out as much as humanly possible, engaging every single person talking to them about chiropractic, about the principles, about living a congruent lifestyle so people can see you as an example for others, empowering all of your patients in your office to send you referrals. One of my coaches talks about how chiropractic, selling chiropractic is a humanitarian effort. I don't ever lose sleep at all by asking my patients to send me everybody that they know, because my patients are invested in our mission, vision, and purpose. They get it. Chiropractic care is life-saving to their families, and by sharing the message, it's a humanitarian goal. So yeah, we can't ever stop. We got to keep going nonstop, every day, all day.
I like that. What have you found to be the best avenues of learning how to adjust these kids? Because, yeah, you can be a great marketing person, you can be a great business person, but if you can't deliver the goods to what specifically their bodies need, and it's obviously going to be different than someone who can handle more stimulation.
Yeah.
What have you found to be the best ways of learning how to approach these kids?
Well, full disclosure, I do teach a lot. I employ an analysis known as tonal pediatric analysis. It's based on MC2 and torque release, but it's not the only thing that you can use. I'm obviously a huge advocate of the ICPA. ICPA is the only organization in the world that's doing the type of research right now in pediatrics that I think we need to help support that model in the future. Logan Basic is a huge part of my practice. MLS, Arna Bernier's approach is a huge part of my practice. I think, Thompson to some degree is a great approach as well for kids that you can do a leg check on, and John Minardi and Jim Thompson both teach that in the ICPA. Ron Castellucci also teaches an AMP approach, advanced muscle palpation approach to taking care of kids. So there's multiple different flavors, but they're all different avenues that get to the same destination. I think if we're employing like high velocity rotary brakes on our babies, which I know a lot of old school chiropractors are still doing, I don't think that's appropriate. And I think the research has definitely supported this new paradigm in care where less is a lot more. But you have to be able to take these courses, these postdoc courses. You need to entrench yourself in them, and you need to treat yourself like a philosopher scientist, where if you see something that doesn't necessarily make sense, we'll disagree with it and defend your position. That's how our profession will move forward. It won't be built on charisma and golden caps. It's going to be built on the backs of young students and grads like you guys, who can think critically through these situations, understand that subluxation is not simple. It's not multimodal. We can't pop and pray like chiros were doing in the 70s and 80s. And we need to have objective measures that we know are congruent and commensurate with our outcomes, which is to make sure the nervous system is functioning properly. I will tell you, and I just taught this in a smaller version this past weekend in Mammoth. Chiropractic is one of those things where, in the old days, we would assume that the adjustment was axiomatic, meaning if you get the adjustment, then the innate is going to take over and the body is going to heal itself. There's a good possibility in my practice in the first couple of weeks that I'm going to completely exceed my patient's metabolic capacity, my little babies, especially my sensory kids, which means I got to know when I'm doing too much. I can't just guess. I can't just pray for it and assume that it's going to get better. It helps us dial in our approaches so that these kids can actually improve on a linear basis and stay that way. But again, you can't just quote unquote treat these kids as though they're little adults. You got to understand it. So the training is key. Like I said, start with ICPA. Spend time on the shoulders of giants. Go shadow docs who see lots of kids, not just docs who say they see kids. I'm talking like practices who have 50% or more volume of children under 18, and see how they get the results they get. Talk to parents. See how the parents view chiropractic care, because their explanation is going to be different than the chiro's explanation. You just immerse yourself in it and read as many books on pediatric development as you possibly can. I'm reading through Sue Goddard's primitive reflex text right now, and it's not exactly chiropractic per se, but talks a lot about neural development in children. So we know what it look like, and we work towards it.
Yeah, so. That's awesome. Speaking of books, you kind of had a great segue in what I was about to ask next. What would you say are your top 3 books? I know this is so hard to think of because you probably read a lot, but if you could pick a top 3, maybe either while you were a student or since you've been in practice or just even in the last year or so, what would you say are your top 3?
Well, my Bible is Pediatric Chiropractic, edited by Claudia Onrig and Greg Plugger. I mean, if you're taking care of kids and you don't have that book, you need it, because it's got everything in it. There's some things that I disagree with. There's some things that are a little outdated, but by and large, it's my desk reference. So if I get stuck on something, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to come back to this guy because it's kind of like the standard of care, I'd say. Number one. Number two, doubt, volume 14 is the chiropractic Bible. I'm aghast at how many chiropractors have never read Stevenson cover to cover. It's unbelievable. Stevenson it's the concepts in there, while they're relatively outdated and they're old, there's so many core foundational elements in there that every single chiropractor needs to understand. And frankly, I talked about this at the beginning of our call, but it bears repetition. Chiropractic is founded on the premise that there's order in the universe and the body is capable of healing. If for 1 minute you as a chiropractor do not agree with that statement, you're not a chiropractor, right? You have to believe this in your core of cores, because everything else comes from that. Stevenson extrapolates on these concepts through, the beginning of the freshman text all the way through the senior text. And it's required reading. You have to know it, and to that regard, Rob Sinnott's textbook at Chiropractic Philosophy, which is really a commentary on the 33 principles, is also required reading for every single chiro. Understanding that the normal complete cycle is our ultimate goal. And then everything that we do has to restore normal function to the nervous system. It's absolutely key. Furthermore, I think Stevenson is the guy that you really want to understand, so that when a patient gets on the table, you know whether or not an adjustment is even necessary. The question I ask for my chiropractors that I teach is, how often do you see patients who don't require an adjustment? And, I get cross-eyed looks all the time. Like, well, why would you not ever adjust a patient? Well, the answer is, if the nervous system is functioning properly and they just need time to heal, then back off. An adjustment is a destructive force. Innate in itself is constructive, which means once you remove all the interference, innate has to do the job. You're not healing the patient. You could potentially be making them worse if you're over adjusting. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Stevenson and then Rob Sinnott as a tertiary reference. Beyond that, honestly, there's so many freaking books. I don't know if I could give you like a third one that I really like the most. I love Bruce Lipton. I've been reading a ton of Bruce. I really enjoy Norman Doidge's books. Norman Doidge is a neuropsychiatrist who wrote The Brain That Changes Itself. That's one of the transformative volumes that I read that really helped me understand the nature of neuroplastic change in the brain. You wrote another book recently that I can't remember. I love Heidi Havek's research. I read her research all the time. Her book, The Reality Check, is a great book for all of us to read and to give to our patients, because it talks about how chiropractic changes brain and nervous system. God, there's just so much. So yeah, start there. Anybody who's watching who needs more references, once you're done, give me a call. I'll send you some recommendations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have some books to add to my Amazon wish list now. All right. Do you have any last thoughts for the viewers, the students and chiros that might be watching before you see them at the summit in October?
Yeah. When you're taking care of kids, just remember that it's a sacred bond between you and this child. Guarding the sacred trust in chiropractic is one thing, but when you're taking care of children, if you have a practice that sees kids, it's a direct reflection of how much the community trusts you to be able to get things done. I use my percentage of pediatric visits in my office as my so-called trust quotient. If I ever get to the point where I'm not seeing the percentages that I need to, it's because my new patients don't trust me, which means I got a training problem and I got to go back and really slow down my educational process so my parents understand that every single child in my community needs to be under care. Check your stats, guys. If you guys are taking care of families in your practices, really be honest with yourself and look at how you're doing. If you really aren't seeing that percentage of children that you want, you need to go back to basics and realize that parents don't trust you. And that's a hard lesson to learn. Trust can be a reflection of your empathy, of you being able to hold space, of you being able to communicate and connect with your patients. It could be an educational piece as well. which means if you're not there, get educated. Don't fake it till you make it when it comes to kids. Go do the ICPA. Go train with me and Steve. Go train with, with certain coaches that will teach you how to be really awesome chiropractors that takes care of kids. Just whatever you do, don't go into isolation and just pretend that nobody else is paying attention, because they really, really are. And you have this tremendous potential, this tremendous power to make huge impact in your community. And it starts with those little.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Dan. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today. And I'm sure I can speak with everyone when I say we're excited to see you in October in Marietta.
Yeah.
And we'll see you later.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right. Quick reminder one more time. You can get your tickets at thepediatricsummit.com. It's going to be October 5th through 7th, and we can't wait to see you there. Bye.